My name is Victoria Sterling, and at 28, I built a $50 million tech empire from nothing. But standing in that pristine wedding venue bathroom, staring at the red handprint across my cheek, I realized my biggest mistake was not cutting ties with my family years ago. What happened next would destroy everything they thought they knew about control, manipulation, and the daughter they underestimated. Some betrayals run so deep that even blood cannot wash them clean, and mine was about to rewrite our entire family legacy forever. Before we dive into this wild family drama that literally changed everything, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button if you have ever dealt with toxic family dynamics, and make sure to subscribe because this story has more twists than a pretzel factory. Trust me, you will want to see how justice gets served ice cold in this one. The morning of my sister Emma's wedding started like any fairy tale. Rose petals scattered across marble floors, champagne bubbling in crystal flutes, and bridesmaids giggling in silk robes, while professional photographers captured every moment. I had flown in from Silicon Valley specifically for this day, bringing my checkbook and genuine excitement for my little sister's happiness. What I did not bring was any suspicion that my parents had orchestrated the entire weekend as an elaborate trap. Emma looked radiant in her custom Vera Wang gown, and for those precious morning hours, I felt like we were just sisters again. Not the successful entrepreneur and the struggling artist. Not the one who escaped versus the one who stayed. Just two women who had shared bedtime stories and inside jokes for decades. I helped zip her dress, fixed her veil, and even teared up during our private moment before the ceremony. The first red flag appeared during the rehearsal dinner. My father, Robert, kept steering conversations toward my company, TechFlow Innovations. He asked detailed questions about our recent acquisition, our employee count, our projected growth. Initially, I attributed his curiosity to paternal pride. My mother, Patricia, chimed in with comments about family loyalty and how success should lift everyone up together. Their tag-team approach felt coordinated, but I dismissed my instincts as paranoia from too many cutthroat business dealings. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Emma glowed as she exchanged vows with David, a genuinely kind man who worked as a high school teacher. I watched my parents beam with pride and felt a dangerous warmth spreading through my chest. Maybe I had been too harsh in my judgments. Maybe family really could be salvaged. Maybe the distance I had maintained for years was unnecessary protection against people who truly loved me. During the cocktail hour, my uncle pulled me aside. Uncle James had always been the family truth-teller, the one who refused to participate in our elaborate emotional theater. His weathered face looked troubled as he guided me away from the crowd. "Victoria, I need to tell you something," he said, glancing around nervously. "Your parents have been talking to a lawyer about your company. They believe they have some kind of claim to ownership because they helped pay for your college tuition." The champagne in my hand suddenly felt like poison. "What do you mean, a claim?" "They think 25% is fair compensation for their investment in your education. They have been planning this conversation for months, waiting for the right moment when you would be surrounded by family and feeling sentimental." My blood turned to ice water. Everything clicked into place with sickening clarity. The detailed questions about my business. The emphasis on family loyalty. The timing of having this conversation at Emma's wedding, when saying no would make me look like the villain disrupting a sacred family celebration. They had weaponized my love for my sister and my desire to maintain family harmony. "They are planning to corner you tonight," Uncle James continued. "I overheard them talking about how you cannot refuse in front of everyone without looking selfish. They think the public pressure will force your hand." I excused myself and walked to the bathroom, my mind racing through the implications. My parents had never shown interest in my business journey. They had criticized my decision to drop out of graduate school to pursue entrepreneurship. When I was sleeping on friends' couches and eating ramen for months, they offered no support beyond lectures about making sensible choices. Now that TechFlow had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams, suddenly they were investors who deserved returns. The worst part was not their greed, but their calculated manipulation. They had turned Emma's wedding into a business ambush. They were willing to hold my sister's happiness hostage to extract money from me. The sheer coldness of that strategy revealed who my parents really were beneath their loving facades. I stared at my reflection in the ornate bathroom mirror, seeing clearly for the first time in years. The designer dress I wore cost more than my parents' monthly mortgage. The watch on my wrist represented more liquid assets than they would see in a lifetime. But none of that wealth could buy me genuine family love or protect me from their entitled demands. When I returned to the reception, everything looked different. The fairy lights seemed harsh rather than magical. The laughter sounded forced and hollow. My parents' smiles appeared predatory as they approached me near the bar, their eyes gleaming with anticipation of easy money. "Victoria, sweetheart," my mother began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "your father, and I want to have a little chat with you about something important." "Of course," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "What would you like to discuss?" They guided me to a quiet corner, away from the other guests, but still visible to anyone who might glance over. The positioning was strategic, designed to prevent me from making a scene without witnesses. My father cleared his throat, assuming his most authoritative tone. "We have been thinking about everything we invested in your education and your early career. The private school tuition, the college expenses, the support we provided during those difficult early years. We think it is only fair," my mother added, "that we receive some return on that investment now that you have been so successful." There it was. The trap they had spent months constructing, sprung at the moment when I was supposed to be celebrating my sister's happiness. They wanted 25% of everything I had built, and they wanted me to agree while surrounded by wedding guests and family members who would remember this conversation forever. I looked at these two people who had raised me, who claimed to love me, who were now attempting to extort millions of dollars from me using emotional manipulation and social pressure. In that moment, something fundamental shifted in my understanding of our relationship. "That is an interesting perspective," I said carefully, buying time while my mind formulated a response. "Can we discuss this tomorrow when we can focus properly without distracting from Emma's special day?" Their faces fell slightly, disappointed that their ambush had not yielded immediate capitulation. But they agreed, probably thinking they could regroup and apply additional pressure in a more private setting. What they did not know is that I had already started planning my counterattack. That night in my hotel room, I sat cross-legged on the king-sized bed with my laptop open, surrounded by legal documents and financial records. The fairy tale wedding felt like it had happened in another lifetime, though only hours had passed since my parents revealed their true intentions. Sleep was impossible when my mind was racing through the implications of their betrayal and the strategic response it demanded. I started by documenting everything I could remember from our conversation, typing out direct quotes while they remained fresh in my memory. Uncle James had given me a crucial advantage by warning me in advance, but I needed concrete evidence of their attempted extortion if this situation escalated to legal territory. Next, I pulled up my company's financial records and legal structure. TechFlow Innovations was incorporated in Delaware with ironclad ownership documentation. I owned 87% of the company outright, with the remaining shares distributed among key employees and early investors who had actually contributed capital and expertise during our startup phase. My parents had never invested a single dollar in the business itself. The college tuition argument was particularly ridiculous from a legal standpoint. Parents supporting their children's education created no automatic ownership claims over future earnings or businesses. If that were the case, every successful person would owe their parents percentage points of their accomplishments. It was emotional manipulation disguised as business logic. But I knew this was not really about legal claims or rational arguments. This was about power, control, and a fundamental misunderstanding of who I had become since leaving home. My parents still saw me as their dependent daughter whose success was somehow their achievement. They could not accept that I had built something entirely independent of their influence or support. I called my lawyer, despite the late hour. Sarah Chin was a brilliant attorney who specialized in family business disputes and had helped me structure TechFlow's legal protections from the beginning. Her phone rang 3 times before she answered with characteristic directness. "Victoria, this better be important." I was deep into a Netflix binge. "My parents are demanding 25% ownership of TechFlow as repayment for my college tuition," I said without preamble. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then burst into laughter. "Are you serious? That is the most legally ridiculous thing I have heard all week, and I specialize in family business drama. They ambushed me at my sister's wedding. They have been planning this for months, waiting for the right emotional moment to maximize pressure." Okay, now I am not laughing anymore. That is actually pretty sophisticated manipulation. What do you want to do about it? I had been thinking about that exact question for hours. My initial impulse was to cut contact completely, but that would punish Emma for our parents' behavior. She had done nothing wrong except get married at an inconvenient time. More importantly, simply walking away would not teach my parents the lesson they desperately needed to learn about consequences. "I want them to understand exactly who they are dealing with," I said slowly. "They think I am still the scared college dropout who needed their approval. They have no idea what I am capable of when someone threatens my business." "What are you thinking? They want to play games with my money? Let me show them how those games work when you are dealing with someone who actually understands power and leverage." Sarah's voice carried a note of warning. "Victoria, be very careful here. Family disputes can get ugly fast, and you have a lot more to lose than they do. That is exactly why I need to end this decisively. They are counting on my reluctance to hurt family members. But they just proved that they have no such reluctance when it comes to hurting me." We spent the next hour developing a strategy that was both legal and devastatingly effective. Sarah would research any business connections my parents might have that could be influenced by their behavior toward me. Meanwhile, I would gather additional evidence of their attempted extortion while maintaining the appearance of considering their demands. After hanging up, I opened my laptop and began researching my parents' financial situation in detail. What I discovered was illuminating and depressing in equal measure. My father's small business was struggling with debt. My mother's part-time job barely covered their credit card payments. They were financially desperate, which explained the timing and desperation of their scheme. But financial pressure did not excuse attempting to extort their own daughter. If anything, it made their behavior more manipulative, not more sympathetic. They had waited until I achieved significant success, then tried to claim credit and compensation for achievements they had not supported. I also investigated Emma's new husband, David, to ensure he was not complicit in this scheme. Everything I found suggested he was exactly what he appeared to be, a decent man who taught high school English and had no idea his new in-laws were planning to shake down his sister-in-law for millions of dollars. Emma deserved protection from the fallout that was coming. Around 3 in the morning, I finally had a complete picture of the situation and a plan for addressing it. My parents had made a critical error in their calculations. They assumed I would prioritize family harmony over business principles. They thought my success had made me soft and sentimental. They were about to discover how wrong those assumptions were. The next morning, I received a text from my mother asking when we could continue our conversation from the wedding. The casual tone was infuriating, as if demanding 25% of someone's life work was equivalent to discussing weekend plans. Instead of responding immediately, I drove to Emma's new apartment where she and David were opening wedding gifts. My sister looked radiant and relaxed, still glowing from the previous day's celebration. Seeing her happiness reinforced my determination to handle this situation without collateral damage to her marriage. "Victoria, I am so glad you stopped by. David and I were just talking about how perfect yesterday was." I hugged her carefully, noting how different this embrace felt compared to the one we had shared before her ceremony. Everything had changed in the span of 24 hours, but she had no idea her wedding had been used as a weapon against me. "It really was beautiful, Emma. You looked absolutely stunning." We spent an hour admiring gifts and sharing coffee while David told stories about nervous moments during the ceremony. Their easy happiness created a sharp contrast with the dark thoughts consuming my mind. These were the relationships worth protecting. This was what family should actually look like. When I finally left their apartment, I had confirmed that neither Emma nor David knew anything about our parents' scheme. They were innocent casualties who deserved shelter from the storm that was coming. That afternoon, I sent a carefully worded text to my parents suggesting we meet for dinner to discuss their proposal in detail. What they did not know was that this dinner would be the opening move in a chess game they were utterly unprepared to play. The restaurant my parents chose for our dinner meeting was telling in its symbolism. An upscale steakhouse in the heart of downtown, the kind of place where business deals were made over expensive wine and perfectly prepared filet mignon. They were trying to frame this conversation as a legitimate business negotiation rather than what it actually was, an attempted shakedown of their own daughter. I arrived 15 minutes early and selected a corner table that provided privacy while maintaining visibility to other diners. My parents needed to understand that this conversation was happening in public, with potential witnesses to their behavior. I had also arranged for Sarah to be dining at a table across the room, close enough to observe, but far enough to maintain plausible deniability. My father appeared first, dressed in his best suit and wearing the confident expression of a man who believed he held all the cards. My mother followed, carrying a leather portfolio that presumably contained whatever documentation they thought supported their claims. They both kissed my cheek and settled into their chairs with the satisfied air of people who expected this evening to end with a substantial financial windfall. "Victoria, sweetheart, thank you for agreeing to discuss this properly," my mother began, her voice warm with artificial affection. "We know yesterday was not the ideal time or place, but we were just so excited about the possibilities." "Of course," I replied, keeping my tone neutral and professional. "I appreciate you wanting to have this conversation in a more appropriate setting." The waiter appeared to take our drink orders, and my parents selected an expensive bottle of wine to share. They were already spending money they did not have, confident that their scheme would succeed. Their presumption was breathtaking and informative. Once we had ordered our meals, my father opened the leather portfolio and pulled out several documents. The first was a printout of an article about TechFlow's recent acquisition, with several passages highlighted in yellow marker. The second appeared to be a handwritten list of expenses they claimed to have incurred supporting my education. "We have been doing some research," my father announced, "and we think our contribution to your success has been significantly undervalued." He slid the expense list across the table. The numbers were staggering and largely fictional. They had inflated every educational cost, included expenses like food and clothing that parents normally provide without expecting returns, and even added interest calculations as if my childhood support had been a loan rather than parental responsibility. "This is interesting," I said, scanning the document. "Can you walk me through some of these figures?" My mother leaned forward eagerly. "Well, there was the private school tuition through high school, which was almost $200,000 over 6 years. Then college costs, including room and board, textbooks, and that semester abroad program in London. Do not forget the SAT prep courses," my father added. "And all those music lessons and summer camps that built your leadership skills." I nodded thoughtfully while internally marveling at their audacity. They were retroactively reframing every aspect of my childhood as a business investment rather than normal parental support. By their logic, every successful person should owe their parents a percentage of their lifetime earnings. "I see you have also included interest calculations," I observed. "What rate did you use for those projections?" 8% annually, my father replied proudly. "We thought that was fair given the risk of investment in education." "Risk," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "You are suggesting that supporting your own daughter's education was a risky investment that now deserves returns." "Not exactly risk," my mother interjected, sensing the dangerous direction of my questioning. "More like deferred compensation for our faith in your potential." The waiter returned with our wine and appetizers, creating a brief pause that allowed me to formulate my next move. My parents used the interruption to toast our family and my success, their glasses raised in premature celebration of money they would never see. "I have some questions about the legal basis for your claims," I said once the waiter departed. "Have you consulted with an attorney about the validity of demanding ownership percentages based on educational support?" My father's confidence flickered slightly. "We have done some preliminary research, but we assumed this would be a family matter that we could resolve privately." "Of course," I agreed. Family matters often work best when everyone understands the actual legal framework we are operating within. I pulled out my own portfolio, considerably thicker than theirs, and placed it on the table. I have also done some research, and I would like to share what I discovered. The first document was TechFlow's incorporation papers, clearly showing my complete ownership of the company. The second was a legal analysis Sarah had prepared, explaining why educational support created no ownership claims under any jurisdiction's business law. The third was a timeline of my company's development, documenting how every major milestone had occurred after I became financially independent from my parents. "This is fascinating reading," I said, keeping my voice conversational while watching their faces change. Particularly the part about how parental support for education is considered a gift under tax law, not a loan or investment that creates ongoing obligations. My mother's hand tightened around her wine glass. "Victoria, you're making this sound much more complicated than it needs to be. We are family. We should be able to work something out that feels fair to everyone." "I absolutely agree that we should work something out that feels fair," I replied. "The question is what fairness actually looks like in this situation." My father cleared his throat and attempted to regain control of the conversation. "Look, we are not trying to be unreasonable here. 25% might be negotiable if you feel that is too high." "Dad," I said quietly, "let me make sure I understand your position correctly. You believe that paying for my education entitles you to ownership of a company you never invested in, never worked for, and never supported during its most critical development phases." "When you put it that way, it sounds harsh," my mother protested. "But we raised you, we shaped your values, we gave you the foundation that made your success possible." "That is true," I acknowledged. "You did raise me. And one of the most important things you taught me was the difference between right and wrong." The temperature at our table seemed to drop several degrees. My parents were beginning to realize that this conversation was not proceeding according to their script. "What exactly are you saying?" my father asked, his voice taking on a harder edge. "I am saying that demanding money from your children based on the cost of raising them is wrong. I am saying that ambushing someone at their sister's wedding to pressure them into financial agreements is wrong. And I am saying that threatening family relationships to extract money is a form of extortion that I will not tolerate." My mother's face flushed red. "Victoria Elizabeth Sterling, how dare you speak to your parents this way? After everything we have done for you." "After everything you have done for me," I repeated, my voice growing harder. I would have expected better than this conversation. My father leaned forward, his expression shifting from disappointed to angry. "You have become arrogant and selfish. Success has gone to your head and made you forget where you came from." "On the contrary," I replied calmly. "Success has given me the clarity to see situations exactly as they are, without the emotional confusion that used to cloud my judgment." The main courses arrived, creating another brief intermission. But the tension at our table was now thick enough to cut with a knife. Other diners were beginning to glance over, sensing the drama unfolding in our corner. "Let me make this very simple," I continued once the waiter left. "I will not be giving you any ownership in my company. I will not be paying you any compensation for the educational support you provided. And if you continue pursuing this matter, I will take legal action to protect my business from any further harassment." My mother's wine glass hit the table harder than intended, sloshing red wine across the white tablecloth. "You are seriously going to choose money over family?" "No, Mom," I said, standing up and placing enough cash on the table to cover the entire meal. "You already made that choice when you decided to treat your daughter like a business opportunity instead of a family member." I walked out of that restaurant knowing that everything between us had changed forever. But I also knew that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is refuse to enable their worst impulses. The real war was just beginning, and they had no idea what they had started. The next morning brought a flurry of angry text messages from both parents, each more demanding and manipulative than the last. My mother's messages oscillated between guilt trips about family loyalty and threats to involve other relatives in our dispute. My father's texts were more direct, warning me that I was making a huge mistake and would regret my selfishness. I forwarded every message to Sarah, building a comprehensive record of their escalating harassment. What my parents failed to understand was that their emotional volatility was becoming legal evidence of their inappropriate behavior. Every threatening text, every guilt-laden voicemail, every attempt at manipulation was creating a documented pattern that would be useful if this situation required court intervention. But I had no intention of letting this reach courtroom proceedings. I had a much more elegant solution in mind. My research into their financial situation had revealed something interesting about my father's struggling business. He owned a small manufacturing company that supplied parts to larger corporations, and one of his biggest clients was a subsidiary of a tech conglomerate where I had significant influence through industry connections. A few strategic phone calls could create serious problems for his already precarious business relationships. However, that approach felt too crude, too much like the kind of vindictive behavior my parents would expect from someone driven by pure emotion. Instead, I decided to demonstrate the difference between their amateur manipulation tactics and professional-level strategic thinking. I called Emma first, knowing that my parents would eventually try to recruit her as an ally in their campaign against me. My sister deserved to hear my perspective before their version of events poisoned her perception of the situation. "Emma, I need to tell you about something that happened at your wedding," I began, after congratulating her again on the beautiful ceremony. "Oh God, what did Mom and Dad do now?" she asked with immediate resignation. My sister had always been more perceptive about our parents' problematic behaviors than I had given her credit for. I explained the entire situation, from Uncle James's warning through the disastrous dinner meeting. Emma listened in increasingly horrified silence as I described their demands and the calculated nature of their ambush at her wedding. "Victoria, I am so sorry," she said when I finished. "I had no idea they were planning any of this. They completely used my wedding as a weapon against you." "That is not your fault," I assured her. "But I wanted you to know what was happening before they tried to involve you in their scheme." "What are you going to do?" "I am going to teach them a lesson about consequences," I said carefully. "But I want to make sure you and David stay completely out of it." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Do you need me to do anything?" "Just stay neutral. Do not take sides or get involved in any conversations about this. Let them know you support my right to make my own business decisions." "Of course. Victoria, I hope you know that David and I think what they did was completely wrong." That conversation strengthened my resolve and eliminated one potential avenue for my parents to apply additional pressure. With Emma safely out of the equation, I could focus on more direct measures. My next call was to Uncle James, who had provided the crucial early warning about their plans. He deserved to know how his information had been used and what was coming next. "I figured you would not just roll over for their nonsense," he said when I described the dinner meeting. "Your parents always did underestimate you." "They're about to discover exactly how much they underestimated me," I replied. "But I want to make sure you are prepared for the fallout." "What kind of fallout?" "They're going to be very angry when they realize their scheme has completely backfired. They might try to turn other family members against me or spread lies about what actually happened." Uncle James chuckled grimly. "Victoria, most of the family already knows your parents can be manipulative and demanding. You might be surprised by how little sympathy they get for trying to shake down their successful daughter." That afternoon, I implemented the first phase of my counterattack. I hired a private investigator to conduct a comprehensive background check on both parents, focusing specifically on their business dealings and financial obligations. The investigator's preliminary report revealed several concerning details about my father's company practices and my mother's employment history that would become relevant if this situation escalated further. I also contacted my accountant to ensure that any gifts or financial support I had provided to my parents over the years were properly documented. The irony was not lost on me that while they were demanding compensation for their historical support of my education, I had actually provided them with significantly more financial assistance during my adult years than they had ever provided me. The most crucial element of my strategy involved leveraging my professional network and industry reputation. I began making discreet inquiries about my parents' behavior to mutual business contacts and community connections. I did not need to say anything negative about them directly. I simply asked questions about their recent activities and let other people draw their own conclusions about their character. The beauty of this approach was its subtlety. I was not attacking my parents or spreading malicious gossip. I was simply allowing their own actions and choices to speak for themselves within a broader context of professional and social relationships. By the third day after our dinner meeting, the pressure was beginning to show results. My father received a concerned phone call from one of his business partners, asking whether there were any family issues that might affect their working relationship. My mother discovered that several of her book club friends had heard rumors about family financial disputes and were asking uncomfortable questions. The crisis reached its peak when my parents' mortgage lender called to schedule a meeting about their recent late payments and outstanding debt. Apparently, someone had raised questions about their financial stability and their tendency to make unrealistic claims about potential income sources. That evening, my phone rang with a call from my father. His voice was strained and desperate, completely different from the confident businessman who had presented his ownership demands just days earlier. "Victoria, we need to talk," he said without any preliminary pleasantries. "I am listening," I replied neutrally. "Things are getting out of hand. People are asking questions about our finances and our family situation. This is affecting our business relationships and social connections." "That sounds very stressful," I said with complete sincerity. "How can I help?" "You can call off whatever campaign you have started against us." "Dad, I have not started any campaign against you. I have simply been honest about our recent interactions when people have asked me direct questions." The silence stretched long enough for me to hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. "What do you want from us?" he finally asked, his voice small and defeated. "I want an apology. I want acknowledgement that demanding ownership of my company was inappropriate and wrong. And I want to guarantee that this kind of manipulative behavior will never happen again. And if we do that, then we can begin the process of rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms." The ball was now in their court, but they no longer had any leverage to dictate the terms of engagement. The apology came in the form of a handwritten letter delivered to my hotel the next morning. My mother's careful cursive filled 2 pages of cream-colored stationery, the kind she reserved for important correspondence. The letter was a masterpiece of non-apology apologizing, filled with phrases like, "Sorry you felt hurt," and "regret any misunderstanding," while carefully avoiding actual admission of wrongdoing. My father's contribution was shorter and more direct, but equally hollow. He acknowledged that their timing had been inappropriate and that they should have approached the conversation differently. However, he still maintained that their request for compensation had been reasonable in principle, even if the execution had been flawed. I read both letters twice, then forwarded copies to Sarah for her legal files. These documents would be valuable evidence if my parents ever tried to revise history about what had actually occurred between us. But the letters were just the opening gesture in what became a comprehensive campaign of damage control on their part. Over the following days, my parents reached out to various family members, trying to spin their version of events before my perspective could take hold. They portrayed themselves as victims of my corporate arrogance and painted me as an ungrateful daughter who had forgotten her humble origins. The family response was illuminating and mostly disappointing. My Aunt Linda called to lecture me about the importance of family loyalty and suggested that sharing my wealth with my parents was simply the right thing to do. My cousin Mark sent a long email about how families should stick together regardless of disagreements. Several other relatives expressed concern that I was letting business success change my values and priorities. However, a few family members surprised me with their support. My grandmother, now 91 and sharper than most people half her age, called to express her disgust with my parents' behavior. "Victoria, sweetheart, what your parents did was trashy and manipulative," she said in her blunt Midwestern way. "I raised your father better than that, and I am ashamed of how he has acted." Uncle James remained steadfast in his support, and Emma continued to refuse involvement despite increasing pressure from our parents to take their side. David, my new brother-in-law, proved his character by supporting his wife's decision to stay neutral while privately expressing his shock at my parents' tactics. The most revealing reactions came from my parents' social and business circles. Friends who had known our family for decades began asking pointed questions about the situation. Several of my father's business associates started expressing concerns about his judgment and reliability. My mother found herself facing uncomfortable conversations at social events when people questioned her motives and character. The financial pressure on their household intensified significantly during this period. My father's largest client delayed signing a contract renewal while they reassessed their vendor relationships. My mother's part-time employer called her in for a meeting about maintaining professional boundaries and avoiding personal drama that could reflect poorly on the company. Their mortgage lender followed through on the threatened meeting, presenting a formal review of their financial situation and demanding detailed explanations for recent credit inquiries and debt consolidation attempts. The stress of these financial pressures began affecting their health and daily functioning. 3 weeks after our disastrous dinner meeting, I received a phone call from Emma that changed everything. "Victoria, you need to know that Dad is in the hospital," she said, her voice tight with worry. My stomach dropped. What happened? He had what they think was a panic attack, but they are running tests to rule out heart problems. Mom found him on the kitchen floor this morning, barely conscious and having trouble breathing. Despite everything that had happened between us, he was still my father. The anger and disappointment I felt about his behavior did not erase decades of shared history or eliminate my basic concern for his well-being. "Which hospital?" I asked, already reaching for my car keys. "St. Mary's downtown." "Victoria, are you sure you want to come? Mom is here, and things might be awkward." "He is my father," I said simply. Personal disputes do not change that basic fact. The drive to the hospital gave me time to think about what I wanted to say and how I wanted to handle this unexpected development. My parents' medical emergency did not erase their attempted extortion, but it did create an opportunity for all of us to reassess our priorities and possibly find a path toward healthier relationships. When I arrived at the cardiac unit, I found my mother sitting alone in the waiting area, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen her. Her makeup was smeared from crying, and her usually perfect hair was disheveled. She looked up when I approached, her expression cycling through surprise, relief, and residual anger. "Victoria," she said quietly, "I did not expect you to come." "How is he?" I asked, sitting down beside her. "The doctors think it was stress-related, not a heart attack. But they want to keep him overnight for observation." She paused, studying my face. "This whole situation has been very hard on him." "It has been hard on everyone," I replied carefully. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of recent events settling between us like a heavy blanket. Finally, my mother spoke again. "I think we made a mistake," she said so quietly I almost missed it. "What kind of mistake?" "All of it. The way we approached you, the timing, the assumptions we made about what you owed us." She looked down at her hands. "We were desperate and scared about money, and we convinced ourselves that asking for your help was reasonable. It was the closest thing to a real apology I was likely to get from either parent." "Mom, asking for help is always reasonable," I said gently. Demanding ownership of my company based on college tuition was not asking for help. That was something else entirely. She nodded slowly, tears starting fresh tracks down her cheeks. When the doctor finally allowed visitors, I accompanied my mother into my father's room. He looked pale and exhausted, connected to various monitoring devices that beeped softly in the quiet space. His eyes widened when he saw me. "Victoria, you came," he said, his voice hoarse and uncertain. "Of course I came," I replied, moving to stand beside his bed. "You're my father." What followed was not a dramatic reconciliation or a complete resolution of our conflicts. But it was the beginning of an honest conversation about family, money, and the toxic dynamics that had brought us to this crisis point. The hospital room conversation marked the beginning of a long, complicated process of rebuilding our family relationships on completely different terms. My father's health scare had stripped away the pretenses and manipulative strategies, leaving us all face-to-face with what really mattered. Over the following months, my parents gradually acknowledged the full scope of their mistakes. The apologies became more genuine and specific as they worked through their own shame and embarrassment about how far they had fallen into entitled thinking. My father eventually admitted that he had convinced himself that my success somehow belonged partly to the whole family, rather than recognizing it as the result of my own work and decisions. My mother proved more resistant to accepting responsibility, but she eventually acknowledged that using Emma's wedding as an ambush location had been particularly cruel and manipulative. She also admitted that their financial desperation had clouded their judgment and led them to rationalize behavior they knew was wrong. The path to forgiveness was neither straight nor simple. Trust, once broken, required consistent effort over time to repair. I established clear boundaries about financial discussions and made it explicit that any future requests for help needed to come through honest conversation rather than manipulation or guilt tactics. I also made it clear that while I was willing to help with genuine emergencies or reasonable requests, I would never tolerate being treated as an automatic solution to their financial problems. They needed to take responsibility for their own choices and circumstances while respecting my right to make independent decisions about my money and business. 6 months later, when my father's business faced a legitimate crisis due to a major client defaulting on payments, he approached me directly and honestly. Instead of demanding anything or claiming entitlement, he simply explained the situation and asked if I might be willing to provide a short-term loan to help cover payroll while he found replacement clients. That conversation was completely different from our previous interactions about money. He provided detailed financial information, proposed specific repayment terms, and explicitly acknowledged that I had every right to decline his request. The respect and humility he showed demonstrated genuine growth and learning from our earlier conflicts. I agreed to provide the loan, but with formal legal documentation and clear expectations about repayment. The business arrangement worked exactly as proposed, and my father repaid every dollar according to the agreed schedule. More importantly, the experience proved that we could have healthy financial interactions when they were based on honesty and mutual respect rather than manipulation and entitlement. Emma's role throughout this entire process was crucial and admirable. She managed to maintain relationships with everyone while refusing to be drawn into taking sides or serving as a messenger between warring parties. Her wedding, which had been weaponized against me, ultimately became a symbol of the kind of healthy family relationships we could build when people treated each other with genuine love and respect. David, my brother-in-law, proved to be an unexpected ally and voice of reason. His perspective as an outsider to our family dynamics helped everyone gain clarity about which behaviors were normal family conflict and which crossed lines into manipulation and abuse. His steady support for Emma's decision to stay neutral while privately condemning my parents' tactics showed impressive character and judgment. The broader family reactions evolved as the truth about what had actually happened became clear. Relatives who had initially criticized me for being ungrateful and hard-hearted gradually understood that I had been defending myself against attempted extortion rather than simply refusing to help family members. Several family members eventually apologized for their hasty judgments and expressed admiration for how I had handled a difficult situation. My grandmother remained a constant source of support and wisdom throughout the entire ordeal. Her blunt assessment of my parents' behavior and her unwavering support for my decisions provided an anchor of sanity during the most chaotic periods of family drama. Uncle James continued to be the family truth-teller, but his role evolved from warning me about my parents' schemes to helping facilitate honest conversations when everyone was ready to move forward constructively. The most important lesson from this entire experience was learning to distinguish between family members who genuinely cared about my well-being and those who saw me primarily as a resource to be exploited. That distinction was not always obvious and required careful observation of people's actions rather than their words. My relationship with my parents today is cordial but boundaried. We have regular contact and share family celebrations, but there is an understanding that certain topics and behaviors are off-limits. They have learned to respect my independence and decision-making authority, while I have learned to appreciate their positive qualities without ignoring their problematic tendencies. The business continues to thrive without any external family drama or interference. TechFlow's success has grown even more substantial in the years since these events, validating my decision to protect the company from inappropriate family claims. The employees who helped build the business continue to benefit from its growth through their legitimate equity stakes, while my parents have learned to take pride in my achievements without claiming ownership of them. Emma and David's marriage has flourished, unburdened by the toxic family dynamics that might have poisoned their early years together. They have become the model for what healthy family relationships can look like when people prioritize genuine love and support over control and manipulation. Looking back on this entire experience, I recognize it as a crucial turning point in my personal development. Learning to stand up to family manipulation was actually harder than any business challenge I had faced because the emotional stakes were higher and the tactics more subtle. But the skills I developed during this conflict have served me well in other areas of life. Recognizing manipulation tactics, setting clear boundaries, and refusing to be guilt-tripped into bad decisions are valuable abilities in any context. Most importantly, I learned that choosing your family does not mean abandoning your biological relatives. It means deciding which relationships deserve your time, energy, and trust based on how people actually treat you rather than their genetic connection to you. The family I have chosen includes Emma and David, Uncle James, my grandmother, and several close friends who have proven their loyalty and love through their actions rather than their demands. These relationships provide all the emotional support and connection that family should offer, without the manipulation and toxicity that can poison biological family bonds. So tell me, have you ever had to draw hard lines with family members who crossed boundaries? How did you handle relatives who felt entitled to your success? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I love hearing about how others navigate these complex family dynamics. If this story resonated with you, smash that like button and hit subscribe for more real-life family drama with lessons learned the hard way. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that it's okay to protect yourself from toxic family behavior, even when it's difficult. Thanks for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's worst impulses. Life has a funny way of teaching us that we get to choose our family based on love and respect, not just biology and obligation.